Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here at Ohio Family Church. I came to Indianola Avenue, almost actually coming up on 50 years ago. I was a young person, and I was further down, closer to Ohio State, and I actually moved in, and then 3 days later, I was sent to Berrytown for the first 120-day training. So I didn't spend a lot of time in Ohio, but I'm happy to be back, and we visit our daughter occasionally. So today, I'm going to, is this connected?
Just
Refresh. I'd like to refresh. How do I refresh? Any button. Oops. Yay.
Well, the microphone's up to you, huh?
Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to speak on a very important topic, which is the situation of our Family Federation in Japan. So I think many of you are praying for Japan, the difficulties that are being faced there, and the repression that's coming down from the government against our movement. So very serious topic, and I hope that I can, I was actually invited to write an article for a non-unification publication last year on this topic, on the topic of the situation of our church in Japan. And so I dug into it, and I actually published a couple of articles and invested in learning about the situation. So I want to share some of that material with you today. So if you invite a professor to do a sermon, you're going to get a little bit of lecture as well as sermon, so I'm sorry. So what I'm going to do, I'll have some introductory remarks, and then I want to highlight the four key issues in this controversy over there. And those are the legal matters involved, the financial matters involved, the religious aspect, and the political aspect. And then if everybody's still with me, I want to look at two key institutions there. The media, which has been driving this development, and the judiciary, which means the court system. So our case is before the court system in Japan. And I want to say something about that, and then I will conclude. So, so this whole issue began with the assassination of the longest-serving prime minister in Japan, Shinzo Abe. And that happened just 2 years ago. So on July 8th, 2022, he was assassinated by a man who said his act was prompted by Abe's support of the Unification Church, officially the Family Federation. In Japan, actually, Japan didn't change the official name of the church to the Family Federation until 2015. So most people in Japan refer to us as the Unification Church Japan, but officially the Family Federation. So the assassin of Abe said he hated the Unification Church because of his mother contributing substantial funds to the church more than 20 years prior to his action. So in the 90s, in the late 90s, she had submitted funds and their family went bankrupt, actually. But rather than blame the assassin, Japanese media began a campaign against the Family Federation. So the scholars refer to this as reversal phenomena. Rather than blame the perpetrator of the act, they blame the unification movement. So that's called reversal phenomena. So initially the outrage focused on pressure tactics used by the church in selling religious artifacts and getting donations from members. And then the attention turned to the links between the Unification Church of Japan and Japan's ruling political party, which is called the Liberal Democratic Party, or LDP. So, and that became really focused. All right, so that occurred on July 8th, 2022, about a little more than 2 years ago. The government's response, about a month and a half after the assassination of Abe, the LDP, the ruling party, announced it would no longer have any relationship with the Unification Church and its associated organizations. Then, a month and a half after that, the Japanese Prime Minister, Kishida, announced that the government would exercise its right of inquiry to open an investigation of the Family Federation. So the government began their investigation, and that investigation went on for 1 year. And on October 13th of 2023, the government asked the Tokyo District Court to issue an order to dissolve the Family Federation under Japan's religious corporation law. So that's the government's response. I'd like to offer a brief providential reflection about these events. In my view, this is sort of my thesis. An attack on Japan as the mother nation in our movement, to me, is an attack on True Mother. The assassin wanted to kill True Mother. I don't know whether you know that. His intention was to kill True Mother. He went to an event when Mother was there, but he couldn't get any access. There was too many people. So instead of True Mother, he focused on a high-profile target, the former prime minister, who supported True Mother. In my view, a lack of unity with True Mother internally led to an attack on Japan externally. So I don't want to, basically, two of the elder two children were doing a great job in Japan before Father's passing. But after Father's passing, they broke from True Mother, and that was very problematic, and that opened the way for, I believe, this external attack. So it's actually a war. It's actually a war in Japan right now. And if you want to win a war, there's two things you have to do. There's sort of two requirements. You've got to get an internal victory. You've got to win the internal victory. And that's the victory of will or determination and spirit. But beyond that, you also have to get the external victory, which means you've got to know the facts. You got to know the facts on the ground, and you've got to build a strategy. So an internal aspect to winning a war and an external aspect. So in this presentation, what I'd like to do is present the facts on the ground and a strategy that's now being followed in Japan. And I hope that this will then, by learning more about the facts on the ground and the strategy in place, that will contribute to will and spirit and determination to win. So that's my desire in this presentation. So I want to turn to these four main issues that I was talking about. And the first is legal, on the legal side. So the government has brought a case, a legal case. They filed it in court to dissolve the Family Federation. So in Japan, they have a constitution. It's put together in 1947, and it affirms freedom of religion. That's Article 20 of the Constitution. And there are actually 180,000 registered religious organizations in Japan. And all of these organizations are under the jurisdiction of Japan's Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science, and Technology. It's called MEXT, M-E-X-T. They have authority over the religious organizations. And this whole dissolution element, since 1947, since the Constitution, or after the Second World War, only 2 religious corporations have been ordered to dissolve. Do you know, anybody know? You probably, some of you older folk might know the one. The one is Aum Shinrikyo, which is a Buddhist sect which released sarin gas, which is a poisonous gas, into the Tokyo subway system in 1995. It killed 14 people and injured more than 1,000. The other religious organization that was dissolved is an organization called Myokakuji Temple, which was dissolved in 2002 for corporate fraud. The leaders of both of these groups were criminally convicted and jailed. And in Aum Shinrikyo's case, they were executed. And in both cases, the group's assets were liquidated. So this means when you face dissolution as a religious organization, you don't just become legally not legal anymore, but they take your assets, they take your property. So I think everybody has to understand that. That's what the unification movement faces in Japan. So as far as the issues go then, the first issue is criminality. So the dissolution standard, the standard by which Aum Shinrikyo and the other were dissolved, was a, quote, breach of criminal law. So on October, and that was the standard. So on 2022, the Prime Minister Kishida said that under Japanese corporation law, violations of law do not include civil torts or complaints. So we have to make a distinction between criminal law and civil law. Criminal law is when you violate a law and the government brings the action against you. Civil cases are when a fellow citizen doesn't like, you say you ripped me off or whatever you did, and I'm going to bring a lawsuit against you. That's a private citizen bringing a lawsuit. That comes under civil law. So according to the law in Japan, a religious corporation can only be dissolved for a violation of criminal law. And Kishida affirmed that on October 18th, 2022. But the very next day, he stated, civil law actions can also be included. So not just criminal, but also a complaint by just people out there. So the action against Family Federation was brought not because of a violation of criminal law, but on the grounds that it acted in breach of civil law and order. And this is very vague. It means anybody can bring up a lawsuit. The vagueness of this claim, it has a ripple effect. If you throw a rock into the lake, then the ripples are going to come out. So it will broaden the application of dissolution requests to any unpopular religious group. So this is a problem. That's one issue, criminality. The second issue is we call complicity. This is the standard that the criminal acts were committed by representative officers of the religious corporation using property acquired and accumulated in the name of the organization. So in 2009, police raided several church centers in Japan, UC centers, but they couldn't find any documents or any evidence linking the church to illegal activities. The UC Family Federation has been subject to lawsuits. People have brought lawsuits. This is not the government, but people have brought lawsuits over donations and other things. But no UC officer has ever been charged, much less convicted of any criminal violations. So according to these two standards of criminality and complicity, the unification movement doesn't fit there. So that's the legal issue, okay? That's the legal issue of our case. And our attorneys, of course, will argue that. On the financial side, financial issues have been a source of controversy over the unification movement in Japan, a major source of controversy. So we have businesses there, separately incorporated. They're not under the church, but they're operated by unification movement members, and they allegedly employ, quote, spiritual sales, fortune telling and other things in selling their products and in generating profits donated to the UC. And since 1987, these companies have been subject to civil lawsuits and out-of-court settlements. So people have brought lawsuits saying, I got ripped off, it's not right, you misled me, da-da-da-da. And sometimes they've gotten some court settlements, and sometimes there's been just a settlement between the church and those people. In the year 2000, Japan tightened its consumer protection law, and in 2009, the UCJ acknowledged responsibility for not having instructed its members about the law and their duty to respect it. And we issued a statement of compliance with the law, and we implemented reforms. That's in 2009. And as a result, there have only been 4 lawsuits have been filed for refund of sales or donations since 2009, and not a single case has been filed in the last 7 years. So it's hard to understand how this, so here's the problem. It's between the linkage between deprogramming and civil lawsuits. So if you look at this chart, the gray line, there's a lot of deprogramming in Japan. So the gray line shows the number of deprogrammings from the 1970 up to 2010, and it rises sharply in the late 80s and then starts declining to the 2000s and so forth. And you see the correlation between the number of deprogrammings and the number of civil lawsuits filed against the unification movement in Japan. So what happens is these anti-lawyer groups, these deprogrammers deprogram them and then turn them over to the anti-lawyer groups, who then take the deprogrammed people and have them file lawsuits against the unification movement. So it's the deprogrammed people that are filing the lawsuits. And it's really an amazing correlation here between the number of deprogrammings and the number of lawsuits. So as a consequence of this controversy on finance, the government has passed laws. In December 2022, the Japanese Diet, which means that's like our Congress, passed a law called Prevention of Unfair Solicitation of Donations by Corporations Act. And this law specified conditions under which people can get refunds for their donations. So in the case of donations to a religious organization, this law gives broad recovery rights to those claiming to be victims of mind control. So if someone says, oh, I made this donation, but I was under mind control and I want my money back, is basically what the government is saying they can do under this law. And also, if their relatives think that they're under mind control, the relatives can bring a lawsuit to get the money back on the grounds of mind control. And in the case of minors, when these donors have children whose parents donate substantial sums, the guidelines provide special procedures such as suspension of parental authority and the appointment of guardians over those children. This is amazing abuse. So this is noticed not just by us, but by critics who say, who warn that this pseudo-scientific theory of brainwash is being resurrected in Japan. Okay, so that's the financial element in this controversy. Now I want to turn to the religious issues. So Japan is a very interesting country. It's what we would say a religious anomaly. That means it kind of departs from the norm. It always ranks among the least religious countries of the world, with nearly 3/4 of the population indicating they have no religious faith. But membership in religious groups totals 181 million people out of a population. There's 181 million members of religious groups and only 124 million people in the whole country, which means people belong to 2 or 3 religious groups. And there's 180,000 registered religious organizations, even though there's only a population of 124 million as of 2020. So it's really weird. Like, we're not religious, but we are involved in spiritual things. So how do we account for this sort of anomaly? It's because Japan has very clear idea of good and bad religion. Good religion is religion that's deeply embedded in Japanese culture, custom, spirituality, tradition. And it means like praying at the temple on the New Year, visiting ancestral graves, holding Buddhist memorial services for the dead. All of that is deeply embedded in Japanese culture. And then there's bad religion, which is identified with these aberrant sect groups, misleading superstitions, nefarious cults, strong organizations, and strongly held beliefs. That's called bad religion. And the UC Family Federation clearly falls into the bad religion category in Japan. And the UCJ was stigmatized, that means kind of disliked in Japan, long before the Abe assassination. And it was subject to vigorous opposition long before Abe. It's interesting, if you look at comparative data, the American sociologist of religion, David Bromley, he documented 396 deprogrammings of unification members in the United States. That's the total, according to his study over 30 years, from 1973 to 1986, which was the high point, and then it was almost totally eliminated. However, in Japan, Japan reports as many as 300 a year, and 4,300 total from 1973 to 2013. That's a 40-year period. So US, 396 total. Japan, as many as 300 a year over there. So regulating, quote, bad religion, in December 2022, the government passed another law and issued guidelines called the Religious Abuse of Children. And among the prohibited, forbidden actions were the following: forcing children to participate in religious activities such as going to church, or requiring them not to move for a long period of time, preventing children from socializing with friends in a way our society generally accepts, allowing children to access only the forms of entertainment approved by their religious organizations, and threatening children with expressions such as, if you don't do this or do that, you'll go to hell, or with images or materials that might arouse fear. So the problem is that, and this is where critics say, well, you know, they gave many, many examples from many different religions that would be violation of these guidelines. So people are critical of this. All right, so that's the religious one. Now political. Turn to the political side. So the UC, exposure of the UC's like connections to the Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, was a driver of public outrage. They found out a lot of LDP politicians had connections to the unification movement. They went to a conference, they signed a petition or something. One survey found that 447 Diet members, that's like Congress people here, prefectural assembly members, and governors had ties to the Family Federation. And the LDP announced that 179 of its 379 Diet members disclosed links with the church, and then they prohibited party members from any further involvement. But the Japanese Constitution allows religious organizations to lobby and campaign for politicians and express political opinions publicly. So it seems hypocritical. It also allows individuals belonging to a political party backed by religious organizations to hold political office. And the best example is a party called Komito, which is a political party founded by the Buddhist organization Soka Gakkai, and it's actually a coalition partner of the LDP. So there's religious political parties in Japan. The Family Fed and the LDP, we originally gained access to LDP leadership through our anti-communist work in Japan, particularly in the 60s. Nobusuke Kishi was one of the founders of the LDP, and he was prime minister of Japan from 57 to 60. He's also Shinzo Abe's grandfather. He was a supporter of the Unification Movement's International Federation for Victory of Communism. He welcomed father to Korea, to Japan, and so forth. And Shinzo Abe, the person who was assassinated, he actually didn't have that deep of connections to the Unification Movement. He issued only 2 public comments on the Family Federation. And both of these were statements of support of not the Family Federation, but the Universal Peace Foundation, UPF. In 2006, he sent a congratulatory telegram. And in 2021, he sent a video message of support to a UPF event, which was one of True Mother's Rallies of Hope. If you remember those during the COVID period, we had Rallies of Hope, and Abe was on video. And it was that, he only did that when he was told that President Trump also was going to do it. So when he heard Trump was going to do it, then Abe was willing to a video message. And it was because of that video message, he was assassinated by the assassin. So the underlying issue on the political side, well, this is what one scholar said. He said Abe's connection to the Unification Church was not unusual, and it was not exclusive. It was only one of many interest groups, religious and otherwise, with which he maintained ties. Abe related to all kinds of groups to further his and his party's political aims and gain LDP, help them win elections. The issue is not the Family Fed's involvement in politics, but our identity as a social pariah, as a movement that people don't like. So the UC in Japan has been singled out for practices common to other religious organizations. They do the same thing, but they single out the Family Federation for their connections with political organizations. Okay, so that is my summary of the key issues involved over there. Legal, financial, religious, and political. Now I just want to briefly say something about 2 key institutions. The first of this is media in Japan. So media has been the driver of this controversy. And one aspect of media is print media, so magazine articles, newspapers, etc. And I'm referring here to a study done by one Japanese scholar who did a data analysis of media. And he found that when they publish articles in newspapers, they do a Twitter post about this article coming out. So he did an analysis of Twitter posts from 2009 to 2023 May, and there were 4,246 articles on the Unification Church. And 99% of them were after 2022, after this assassination. So 4,214 out of the 4,246 were after the assassination. And the vast majority of those articles focused on the church's links to the Liberal Democratic Party, the ruling party. So hounding the UC, going after the UC, was supposed to be about those who suffered damage from the UC, but almost all the news tweets focused on the UC's government connections through believers' links to politicians. So it wasn't about the problem that our church was causing to people at the grassroots level. And if you turn to social media, not print media, but social media, you can look at Google searches, right? We all do Google searches. Well, they did an analysis of Google searches on the Unification Church in Japan from 2004, and there was actually little volume from 2009 to 2022. There wasn't much volume of searches, but from July 2022, there was a surge after the assassination, and then when that surge lasted about 6 months, and then after 2023, it started to slide down again, the Google searches. So Google searches of the UC are actually small compared to other religions in Japan, large religions. And and there's the decrease is correlated there. So this is really a media-driven scare in Japan. If the Unification Church caused harm on a regular basis locally, there would have been a large number of Google searches. However, hounding of the UC, going after the UC, was something only a very small number of people became frantic about. Reporting on the Unification Church was a phenomenon where opinion leaders and mass media influenced the commotion by saying, with little evidence, the church is controlling Japanese politics. That was what they're claiming. Before July 2022, anti-UC activists had very little influence, but after July 2022, the media transformed their activities and assertions into a huge illusion. This is just an illusion perpetrated by media. That's not me, that's this scholar who did this study. Now, in Japan, there's a little problem with the media because, well, first of all, it doesn't have a high ranking among G7 nations. G7 nations are sort of the most economically advanced nations in the world. Japan has the lowest ranking among G7 nations in terms of media freedom. In its 2023 rankings of World Press Freedom, Reporters Without Borders ranked Japan 68th out of 180 countries. So, you know, sort of middle ground. But, and one reason for this is because of their press clubs. Even in America, the press, there's press clubs where the media can be members and then they get access to information through the press club. So in Japan, these press clubs are government approved and restricted. And so if the reporters want information about what's going on and want to sit in on a press conference, they have to be a member of the press club, the Kisha Kurabu. Maybe some of you from Japan know that word, I don't know. But once the Kishida government distanced itself from the UC and labeled it a social evil, reporters limited themselves to one-sided negative stories. So there's like near universal censorship. And again, this is this scholar, this is not my words, this is his words. It's a press disaster and an information disaster for the UC Family Federation in Japan because our side cannot be told. Only the negative side can be told. There's no alternative reality being communicated. So that is the media side. Now you go to the courts. The case is in the courts. The Japanese Constitution guarantees that all judges will be independent and exercise their conscience and not be bound by, and shall be bound only by the Constitution and the laws of the society. However, if you study the reality in Japan, the courts rarely rule against the government, against the executive or legislative branches of the government. They rarely go against them. The ruling, and part of the reason for that is because the ruling party's cabinet has the authority to appoint Supreme Court justices. So in America, when they support, I don't know whether you follow the Supreme Court nominees, it's just like so much controversy in the opposing parties. It's just warfare. But in Japan, the president's cabinet just gets to appoint the Supreme Court members, and there's no like debate. And also the judges have sort of this hierarchical career system which rewards those justices who align themselves with government policies. They get to move up the rank from the district court to the appeal court to so forth. So this kind of, it's a bit of conformity. And in terms of practices, court practices, there's a real lack of transparency. Japan doesn't have jury system like we have in the United States. All the proceedings of the court is private, so you don't really know until they render the judgment. The lawyers are there arguing, they're submitting their briefs, and they're arguing the case before the judges, but there's penalties if you say what's really going on in there. You sort of get the judgment at the end. And also there's a presumption of guilt culture there in Japan, where government prosecutors win 99.9% of all criminal cases and 98% of all appeal cases. So that puts the UC in a difficult situation in terms of the Japanese court system. So our court documents on our case, our dissolution case, are due at the end of this year, December 31st, 2024. And we expect a decision on the dissolution request by the government by August 2025, a year from now. A year from now, we expect a decision. So a lot of effort's going into that case right now. So my conclusion, I want to ask the question, is the tide turning in favor of the Family Federation? There are a few signs that the tide may be turning a little bit. I see 3 signs of change. The first sign is the resignation of the Prime Minister, Kishida, which happened like 4 days ago on Wednesday, August 14th. He said, the second is the growing outcry among religious freedom and human rights advocates against Japan's actions. Internationally, representatives of the United States, the UN, and others are raising red flags about what's going on. And thirdly, the Family Federation itself is transitioning from defense to offense. So I'd like to just briefly talk about each of these points. First, Kishida's resignation. I want to write an article about his resignations when I have the chance. On August 14th, he announced he will step down as leader of the Liberal Democratic Party next month. And his administration championed the dissolution of the Family Fed Japan. But the first result of that has been the dissolution of his own administration. And this will be a positive development for the Family Federation depending on who his successor will be. So that will be very important going forward. So that's number one. Number two, the outcry among religious freedom and human rights advocates internationally. As I said, they recognize the ripple effect beyond the Family Federation of what's going on. The crusade against the UC Family Federation has already led to laws and regulations that severely limit the liberty of all religions in Japan. So human rights advocates are speaking out against this. They also criticize Japan's bad example. We like Japan. Japan is a great ally of America and a great force for good. But in this particular matter, they're exhibiting a bad example. It's a free and democratic country, and it guarantees freedom of religion. But Japan is unique in seeking to dissolve a church that has not been criminally punished. That's unique among democratic nations. And these other nations that are more totalitarian and authoritarian, like China and Russia, they do the same thing. They outlaw religions all the time. And they're using the situation in Japan for propaganda. They're saying, oh, well, Japan is doing it. Japan is doing the same thing. We have been proven right. Cults should be suppressed. So that's what they're saying in Russia and China newspapers. Okay, so that was the second point. And then the final point, the transition from defense to offense. So until recently, Family Fed Japan has pursued a top-down strategy, relying primarily on lawyers and overseas VIPs. That's sort of top-down. And Family Fed members themselves have been subjected to all kinds of harassment and abuse. You know, you can't even getting kicked out here, get kicked out there, being mocked, even some physical problems, stuff like that. Also, related organizations like the UPF and Family Women's Federation have been targeted in Japan. So recently, Mother Moon assigned Katsumi Otsuka to Japan to lead the effort there. And Otsuka has initiated a bottom-up strategy along with the top-down strategy. And now Family Federation Japan members have taken to the streets and are conducting protest rallies in every prefecture with as many as 2,000 people demonstrating. So at the same time, Family Fed is continuing the top-down work, sending representatives to speak at major international conferences. So this top-down and bottom-up strategy appears to be a winning strategy. So it's good that we have now this bottom-up strategy along with the top-down strategy. So Japan has a major decision to make about the Family Federation. And the question is, will Japan, like other modern democratic societies, uphold the rights of minority religions consistent with its constitution and its law despite public pressure? Or is Japan's constitution and legal framework supporting religious freedom just a facade, just make-believe, with communal traditions, public opinion, and political pressure dominating their decision-making? So that's the choice that Japan has to make in this matter. Thank you very much.